Okay, so the file that I uploaded is smc with today's date.zip. I may change the name of that, or I may group these together and put them into their own folder. The handout for tonight on text is called advanced text, and that's what's active right there. So you guys can grab them now or grab them later, depending upon whether you want to play along, etc. I've already made, started After Effects, and have imported the files from the thing. Okay. Now, would you guys want to take a quick break before we get into the text? Stretch your legs for just a few moments, and then we'll get into this. Are you ready to go? Okay. Let's make this a short break, though. Let's not make this a super long one. I'm going to pause the, come on, get the pop out. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, I've got 7:34, 7:35 on my clock. So let's go ahead. The rules for text are pretty straightforward in the sense of text must be readable. Now, there are times and exceptions where you're just throwing things into the background that, you know, just to fill in space and stuff. That's okay. But we're talking, generally speaking, you always want to make it readable. Text must be on the screen long enough to be read, to be able to read it. The color and the size of the text, the font choices do matter. And also you want to make sure the color of the text does not conflict with the background. In that front, for example, I've got this red text, and as you can see, that's kind of starting to blend in. It's even worse if I go in here with the eyedropper and change the color. You can see that that letter E is sort of bleeding in and it's getting hard to read. So you always want to be aware that this is going to be an issue, okay? So you want to, now one of the fixes in this, if you must have this typeface, of course, is you can put in, now, generally speaking, graphic design classes, they'll say never, ever, ever put an outline to your text. But video is different. We often do intentionally put a little outline, even if it's only a couple pixels. Can you see how that text now pops against that color? It's much easier to read. And even if I drop down that outline size to like 0.2 of a line, right, because I don't have it selected, select the text first. That's really, really subtle. You can barely tell that I've done an outline there, right? And yet it still helps it pop out. I'm no longer losing that letter E. If you guys watched any TV over the next week or so, look at TV commercials and you'll almost always see there is a little subtle outline there, which will allow you to, you know, make the text more visible, more readable. So something to think about. Now I'm going to intentionally get rid of that again. And because I didn't select the text, it didn't happen. Now, the other thing that you can do text-wise, of course, is you can, of course, do things such as drop shadows. You know, there's multiple ways of doing that depending upon what you want to do. One of the simple ways, of course, is duplicate your layer. Yeah. So, go the other direction. You know, again, that really pops it as well. Now, dealing with two layers is always a pain in the neck, so you don't have to do that because we have other tools available to us. There we go. There's a super fun. Okay, I think my email just clicked on. Okay, so you can see you have all the basic tools available to you that you would have normally in Photoshop, Illustrator, and stuff. Now, what about the special effects? You know, not the filters, but the drop shadow, outline, glow, bevel, emboss, and things like that that you would see normally in Photoshop and stuff. Well, they are in After Effects as well. This is why you can import text directly from Photoshop. But it's in a weird place. So for example, first I'm going to select my text. Yes, as always. Under layers. Okay. Not the blending modes. Layer styles. There we go. For those of you who are Photoshop savvy, this is the exact same thing that you would see in Photoshop. Question. Sorry, guys. I was looking at my screen. Is that the only way to drop chart? Nope. I'm showing you the other way in just a second. I was just showing you a manual way of doing it. Actually, there isn't a, well, there is a drop shadow filter. I do take that back. But if you want to do a more traditional drop shadow, this tool is the one that you're used to. And I forgot to turn on magnifier before class. So for example, now I have transformed, then I have layer styles, and there's my drop shadow controls. We don't have that really nice interface that we have in Photoshop and stuff, but you can see this is exactly what you would see. The size of the drop shadow, the noise, global lighting, color of the drop shadow, etc. The other neat thing about this is, of course, there is a stopwatch next to each of these options, which would allow you to, of course, animate any of these options. Like everything else in After Effects, if you don't like that, you just highlight the name, hit delete, and you can come down to layer styles and choose any of these other options from the stroke, gradient layers, satin, bevel, emboss, bang, and stuff. So this is one of those choices. Because this is not in what looks like a rational spot, and it doesn't have the nice palette that we get into in Photoshop, a lot of people don't even know that this is there. So it's important to know that this is one of your many options built into After Effects. And do that. Okay. And of course, you can then use your transform commands to move the text around the screen to be able to show it off to the audience. Okay, everybody good with that? Makes sense, right? That's pretty simple and straightforward. Since a lot of this is overlapping with Photoshop, I'm not planning on spending a lot of time on those items. Okay, but you can feel free to play with them. Now comes the next question is, that's great. It works for an entire body of text, but what about if I want to animate a single layer? Does that mean that I have to have a layer for each letter? And the answer is no, thank goodness. Okay. We have things called animators, which allow us to create animations for these texts. Now, there's two ways I do this in the class. The first, normally in class, I show that there's actually hidden under the effects and presets area, there's a thing called animating presets, which has a ton of pre-made under text that has all these pre-made animations. So animate the text in, animate text out, create 3D text. Each one of these little folders, for example, animate text in, brings it onto the screen. And you can see there's a ton of choices here. Like filters, you can grab one of these and drag and drop it onto the thing, or double click to put it onto the text layer if the text layer is selected. But the problem with this, of course, is these names are kind of hard to, well, it's like, well, what does it do? What does it really look like? Now, this is also where my handout comes in, because I talk about the presets, pointing this out. The good news is there's actually a way of viewing these before you choose. Go animation, browse presets. And it opened up on my other monitor, so give me a second to rearrange my screen. There we go. Yeah, unfortunately, it opens up Bridge. Adobe has been trying to get us to use Bridge for like forever. And it's like, really, it's not that good, Adobe. It's kind of a pain in the neck. But anyhow, you'll see that there's this text option, which is the same thing as this text folder that we see there. So if I double click on this, you can see there's the next series of folders right up here. So we have animated in, animate out, blurs, etc. So this is just duplicating this information. But what we have here instead is we have pre-made little thumbnails. So when I click on this, I will get in the right-hand preview any second now, this lifetime, there it is. It will show you what the animation actually looks like. No, there's no way to preview it without Bridge. So also, I think you can't, it automatically installs when you install After Effects. You actually have to go in, I've always had to go in and uninstall Bridge when I want to, but because I know that this is here, I always leave it alone. But this is about the only time I use Bridge. I swear they're going to ram it down our throats whether we want to or not. But anyhow, as you can see, the name and the description is pretty much what it sounds like. Dropping character, it drops in the animation, one character at a time. Eye chart, flip up. And some of these are better for one line of text versus multiple lines of text. And you can see which one of those are through the thumbnails and stuff. This is how you make a PowerPoint one. The answer is yes, Jonathan, you can go in and alter the animation. As a matter of, excuse me for a second, I'm going to mute. My apologies, I got something caught in my throat. Yeah, when I do this in person, when I can deal with everybody one-on-one, is I go in and show these animations before, because it sets things up so you can then show how to alter them. I'm not sure that's going to work so much for this. It doesn't let you open Bridge. Then it may not be installed. You're going to have to check those settings. But this will still work. If you go into the folders on the right side, you can still drag and drop. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to choose this one called Character Shuffle In. So what happens with this, as you can see, is it literally moves the characters one letter at a time. So by double clicking on this, can't import. Okay. Joy, it just told me to go to heck. So as you saw, my bridge wasn't working, so I grabbed, drag and dropped it. Notice that immediately that my text vanished. The reason for that is because these are all animations to bring the text onto the screen. Obviously at 000 on your timeline, there's my text way over here. So if I hit play, so the first thing to keep in mind about these pre-made animations is if you don't see your text, it may just be off your screen waiting for the animation to happen. If I come down here and open up my timeline, you'll see under text, there's a new thing called Animator. Sorry about that. And this is where the animation's happening. If I open that up, it gives me all this information. Zoom out again. Screen. Now, I also want to draw your attention to this. Notice there's two round dots on my timeline. These round dots represent, remember I told you way back at the beginning that there's different shapes for keyframes. Round dots literally mean that there's actually the diamond shape or other keyframes underneath a collapsed dot. There's my, so for example, if I open up the thing called the range selector, there are the two actual keyframes that cause this animation to happen. Okay. But when I collapse this all up, those keyframes are hidden from view, but it shows me these round dots to tell you that basically there's something hidden much later. Now keep in mind, I also want to give you a keyboard shortcut. If you hit the letter U on your keyboard, it will automatically go to wherever your keyframes are, no matter how many you have for that layer. If you select multiple layers, it'll open up all of them and stuff. So basically, the animation for this thing is done with a thing called an animator. If I don't like that one, I just hit delete, and too much, don't hit delete twice. And those keyframes are gone, and I can choose a different fade up and flip. Just that simple flip and stuff. And do that. Random shuffle in. So randoms which letter comes in. Now, besides all of those animation ends, I want to point out that there are other folders in here. These pre-made animations are really powerful, and you're free to use them. By the way, I don't take points off for using them, but it's more fun actually to grab these and to adjust them. But for example, I have animation outs to take it off the screen, blurs, curves, etc. So if I were to look at these things, so for example, animation outs are basically the reverse of animation ins. Blurs are what it sounds like. Create various blurry letters and stuff, and curves and spins. Again, what it sounds like. That's what the advantage of the preview. It gives you a little something extra to look at. Now, you can, on some of these, mix and match some of these things. Let's see, lights and optics has some good stuff in it as well. There we go. Finish. But I should warn you that some of these also will cancel each other out. Even if you think of this at the simplest level, if you put an animation in and an animation out onto the same timeline and accidentally put them on the same place of the timeline, like you can have an animation in at the beginning and then put an animation out at the end. Obviously that works, but if you accidentally put them in the same place on the timeline, they'll start canceling each other out and you'll have issues. It's a minor thing, but keep that in mind. Now, where does this animation, pre-made animation, go? Well, it goes wherever you put the play needle. So if I have my play needles here, and I choose one of these, like typewriter, I hit the letter U, you can see that the first keyframe is placed right there. So if I want to come to the end of my timeline, choose animation out. It then puts that on there as well. So my text will animate on. And then it will animate off because my keyframes are not in conflict with each other. Okay. So far, so good. Any questions so far on that? Normally at this point in time in the class, now not everybody has After Effects up on their screen, but I would basically have you guys just mess around with these things and just go in, try different weird combinations and stuff, because they are pretty. How do we actually, it must be installed when you installed. Okay, question one. Since the, obviously the video is not going to have these questions on them. Okay, first question was, how do we install Bridge or access Bridge again? To access Bridge, if it's installed properly, you go basically animation and browse presets. I would like to point out that that is indeed located on my handout as well. So don't always download my handouts. They have all the information you need to do these sort of things. Second question, how do you place the second animation at different keyframes? You just literally place your play needle where you want the animation to start. So my animation on, I would just put it here on the left side at 0, 0, 0 or a little bit in. And animate off, I just put my play needle over here. If I want things to happen at the exact same time, because some of these don't move the things on and off the screen, you just drop them wherever you want. So for example, It's under miscellaneous. Oh, yeah, there's all sorts of weird miscellaneous things that you can do. Okay. Smoky. Like I said, and again, remember, some of these may conflict with each other, so you don't necessarily want to mix and match all of them together. Okay. But normally, just to let you guys know professionally, what we do in real life is most of these we know by heart. We grab them when we want, and then we modify it afterwards. Normally, I very seldom make something from scratch, but we will talk about how to make these things and how they all work together. Okay, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about. Are we good with that, or do you want me to add anything else about these pre-made animations? Oh, the other thing I should point out is beyond the text, there are pre-made animations for different sound effects, etc. Now, making those is a very advanced thing, which we will not cover in this semester. Sorry, just don't have time. It's not that hard, but just only got so much time. Okay, everybody good? Time to move on? Yay, nay. Am I going too fast for you? Okay. All right, with my handout, you'll see that the second part, making self-made text animations, and this is also how you would modify the ones. Okay, the things that we are making are called animate and animators. I didn't come up with these names, people. Somebody at Adobe did. You always tell programmers when they come up with things at 3 in the morning. Okay, and there's lots of different choices here. So give me a second. So basically, you would go into your text options. Again, remember we have layer styles we're not using. Oh, yes, we are. I got bevel in there. Get rid of that real fast. We have all the transform, but underneath text itself, to the right, zoom in for you, we have a thing called animate, the little drop-down pop-out menu. It's not a drop-down, it's a pop-out. Once again, we have many different choices here. Okay. Notice that a lot of these duplicate exactly what we're used to in our transform. But the difference is that these animators basically allow us to control the individual letters. Okay. I'm going to start with position because it's the most straightforward one to begin with. So what I do is I basically say, I'm going to take my text with animate, and I'm just going to select position. Down below, you automatically get the animator, number 1, because you're going to have more than one. And you get what's known as range selection, and there's the position right there, which again with our X and Y. Okay, underneath range selector is where the real power happens, which is the start, the end, and the offset. Plus there's advanced things, but we will not talk about that for the split second. All right, what happens on our screen is this. We get this very bizarre thing, and I'm going to drop this down because these red outlines is the range selectors are this one on the left and the right. See, there's a line with a little triangle and have little handles. Okay, this is the end one, and this is the start one. So if I come back out here, there's the start one. Notice as I move it, increase the start, it's literally grabbing this line with a little triangle and setting this. If I want my text to go the other way, I would do the end point to make it pop up. Now, why is it popping up and moving? Because basically the position for the animator is set to change. I've told it to actually jump up position-wise, Y up down, 159 pixels. So if I change that, you can see that controls my jump, which direction I want things to go. If I want them to come on the screen, I just have to actually make this a high enough number that everything's off the screen. But I like it moving down. So you have to think of these as like the start and end points as of the range selector, literally as margins. Right now, my start and end point is encompassing 2 letters. So it's 2 characters width here. And I can animate just the start or the end. For example, I can change the end one, bring it closer to make things go the other way. But I also have a third number down here called the offset. The start one controls the left side, the end controls the right side, but the offset controls both of these. It moves them equally, okay, from left to right. So for example, if I choose the offset, if it's a negative number, it goes to the left, positive number goes to the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set these back to 0 and 100. I got them too close together. There we go. So say, for example, I want to have one letter jump up and down at a time. I've set the range selector start and end points to be literally 1 character thick. Now I don't animate these. I don't change that information. As you can see down below on my left-hand side, I've got, starting at 0 and ending at 25%. So it's only taking up 1 character. But if I were to animate this offset number, start at the far left-hand side, go forward, and animate it across, then what would happen is my 25% width would allow me to move 1 letter at a time. Boom. So I get the individual letters moving. So by setting my range selector, I tell the computer literally how many characters I want to impact. Now, obviously, with only 4 letters, this is not as impressive as it could be. So for example, set a few more letters. Now my animation, of course, the one question that a lot of people always ask is, but Eric, why did it bounce back? That's because the end and the start are moving equally across. So it's returning back to its original position. If I just wanted them to move down, then I wouldn't be using the offset. I would just be using either the start or the end point to make them go in one direction, staying there. Now, the other thing with the offset, of course, is I could now just as easily reverse what I'm doing and have it come back the other direction. But by only animating the offset, it makes my life a lot easier because there's a lot less keyframes. The fewer keyframes you have, the easier things are to happen and stuff. Okay. Now, again, at this point in the class, I would normally sit there and say, okay, you've got the handout in front of you. Go ahead and start doing some pre-made animations. Now, I should also point out that I have on the back side here what I like to refer to as recipes of how to have fun and try to mix and match these things. Now, I'm going to go over a little bit of that in just a few moments, but before I go racing ahead, any questions, everybody? Does that make sense? The bracketing of the start and end points tends to confuse a lot of people when they first start doing this. So without seeing you and looking over your shoulder, this is going to be something you're going to have to practice and go with my handout on. And rewatch this video, I suppose. So any questions, people? Or have you all wandered off into the other room to watch TV? Okay. What you want to do is obviously make sure that you can see your brackets. And you want to set your start and end points as wide or as close together as how many letters you want to impact. The other thing is you don't have to keyframe this. You can just manually move these things back and forth until you figure out what combination. Now I'm going to, the bracket is set from distance. Okay, so for example, see right now I've set them, yeah, let me start over again then. So basically, there's two ways of doing the distance of the lettering. You can play with the percentages of start and end point until you get them as close or far apart as you want. Or you can manually do this. You can also grab these brackets and set them to wherever you want. See, right now, you can see I've got one set at the letter L here and another one set at the letter E. And then once I have those set, the brackets show up when you put an animator onto your text. Do I need to go that far back? So for example, under text, I went to the animate, chose position, which then gave me my range selector. Now, by default, these things are at the start and end points naturally, first letter and last letter. Sometimes they're hard to see color-wise. So you often want to see me just grabbing these things and moving them. Once I've done that, you can see the brackets there. So my offset, okay, Crystal, did it find it, or Kim? Okay, you've got the chapter of the book and, like I said, my handout. And sometimes it's just very hard to see these son of a guns. Now, here's the thing about these animators is you can have as many as you want on them. So for example, there's my animator 1, but if I go in and decide, not only do I want to do something besides position, I can also choose something like scale. Notice I also have colors and spacing and all these other fun things. Now, some of these, for example, lines and things like that only work if I have more than one line of text. Say we'll do something scale. Now, by adding scale, it's now asking me, well, what do you want to do? Change the size of this. Now, all these things are being impacted. Both the position and the scale are being changed when they're inside the bracket. So I've set the inside of the bracket, this percentage, to give me 2 letters. And then I have an offset, which is I'm moving left and right, moving these equally performance. So right now it's in the middle of the text. But I can also say, okay, everything inside the middle there, I can also make bigger or make smaller. Make it 50% smaller. So now when I move the offset, not only is it moving up and down, but it's also making it look like it's going away from us because it's getting smaller. So I can keep adding more and more, animators. The one thing I do want to recommend, by the way, is do never add all of them, because you'll add so much things to your timeline that it'll drive you nuts. Only add what you need. That's a very good rule to keep in mind. Okay, got a question from Jenna. How come only the 3 letters change size? Because those are the 3 letters inside the brackets. So all the changes I do down below for both position and scale are only impacted by being inside the bracket. When they're outside the bracket, the letters are normal. Okay. If I only want to impact 2 letters, I just make sure the brackets are 2-letter thick. If I only want to impact one, just make sure that they're 1 thick. So that's only 1 letter thickness. We can make it bigger too. Make it 2 and stuff. So besides doing that, we can also say, okay, everything inside those brackets, change the, opacity. We'll drop the opacity down to 50% so we can actually still see it. Oop, 5%? No, that's way too, really makes it. So now we're changing the position of the scale and the opacity when the brackets move and everything inside that bracket. Okay, does that make sense to people? Were you? You get the brackets from the, adding the animator. If you don't have an animator, you won't see the brackets. This is how it allows you to control the individual lettering, is with the brackets. Yeah, this is also one of the reasons why I always tell people, why I start the class with these pre-made ones, because it's much easier to decipher what the heck's going on with them. So for example, if I delete out that and go into one of these other ones, curves and spin, flower bloom, I don't remember what this one looks like though. Now this one, you can see that there's a lot of animations and stuff, and lots of different choices. So by deciphering these pre-made ones, you can often get a lot of other choices going on. Now I'm going to get rid of the opacity in the scale. So right now my brackets are set up to do the just popping up the letters. Okay. Now you guys should have seen, before I deleted them, was again, the reason why these letters are being impacted is simply because they're inside the bracket. What if you want to have things happening at different times? Okay. This gets a little into subtlety, but down below, if you select animator, be number 1, you get whatever you've chosen, such as position, and you get a range selector. If you add more, such as the blur, stroke, opacity, etc., as we were just doing, it will add more to this range selector. However, if you do not select the range selector, say you select just the text, and you can say, okay, I want to add something different, such as, well, we'll go ahead and do rotation this time. Then this is what happens. We get a second animator with a second range selector. To do the really fancy thing, we can have multiple range selectors, so time will happen differently. So for example, range selector number 1 will make the text jump up and down. But animator 2, we can set to move at a different rate of speed. So let me go ahead and just set this up. I'm going to just make a simple animation, tell the offset to move from left to right over 4 seconds. I got the second animator by selecting just text and then hitting animate and got a second one. If you highlight that animator, the first one, you can add to it and just add it to the same range selector. Okay. So for example, here's my second animator with its own different range selector. So this range selector, let's start in the middle, is right now set to roughly 2 letters. Now it's always in motion, so it's sometimes impacting 3. But I can make this other range selector, and unfortunately, this is one of the things that drives me nuts with Illustrator, is quite simply that they're the same color. It would be really nice if they had different color lines, but they don't. So now, 45 degrees, okay. You are correct when you add in the other one. So by doing this as two different animators, I can make the rotation happen at a second set of keyframes. So this one will, for example, have it pop up, and then I can tell this to then start doing its animation at a different location and speed. So now it pops up and then it rotates. It's not a particularly cool animation, but you get the idea. Actually, what I really need to do is when they hit the ground, it should look like that causes the rotation. It's still too slow. There we go. All right, so now it pops up, rolls because it's hitting the ground. So the question comes down to, when do you want to use two animators versus using one animator? The thing comes down to this timing question. Do you want or need to have things happen in different time frames? It's obviously much, much easier to keep everything under one animator with one set of brackets. But it means that everything's going to happen simultaneously. So you're going to have to play with that and make some decisions. Practicing this is the best way to learn this. And getting used to seeing these brackets can, like I said, when you're first starting out, it's like, particularly now that I have two sets of brackets, it's like, wait, which one's which? And it comes down to which one you've highlighted down in your timeline. Because there's the one for the popping up and down, and there's the one for the rotation. Okay, questions so far? This is one of the areas that you guys can go crazy with. I mean, seriously, the power of being able to animate these letters one at a time. It's funky to get used to, but once you do, it becomes this amazing tool where you suddenly go, wow, I can really make the letters do anything I want to. Okay, it's just a matter of getting the timing right. Because you saw how I was just playing with it right now was pop up, hit the ground, rotate. You see, that kind of like the way that looks. Drunken letters. And just a matter of setting the offset to where we want to do. The answer, Max has a very good question here, which is, do we have to make our own text animation for project number 2? You will probably want to use some sort of animator, but I'm perfectly accepting of you guys to use the pre-made ones. Or you might choose one of the other tools. Okay, but as you move forward, I am going to expect to see an appropriate, animation of the text, even if it's just something really simple. That's cool as well. Okay, it all depends upon how you want your project to look. Now, after we get this done, I'll go ahead and we'll start talking about project number 2. So hang in there for a few more minutes before we get to that. I just want to make sure I haven't lost you guys with any of this, and that a lot of this makes sense to you. Okay. So again, it comes down to just doing simple little tools and stuff. Now I'm going to beg off in the sense of ask your forgiveness. There are animators which are called enable pre-character 3D. Next week we're going to be talking about 3D, so hold off and playing with this until we talk about 3D. Otherwise, it'll drive you nuts because it'll be like, what's happening? This makes no sense whatsoever. Okay. As we were discovering last week, the problem with doing this online class is I can't see your work. And, you know, not all of you have the computer up and running because you can't like do things while I'm talking. You're trying to see what's going on. Now, besides all those animators, and I just got rid of everything, there's a lot of other things that you can do with text besides just those things. Do you remember way back at the beginning, a couple weeks ago? Yeah, like forever. We started playing with like masks. Now I've put a mask onto this layer. Okay. I should have also said before doing that I'm about to change subjects again. Okay, so bear with me. Now the mask itself does not render out. The audience does not see it. And this is what they refer to as an open mask, meaning that the endpoint and the start point do not touch each other. But I also promised you that the mask would come back again. Okay, let's see if I can get this zoomed in just a bit closer. Okay. All right. So underneath text, when I put a mask on here, I have a thing called path options. By default, it's set to none. Now, if I had no mask, they wouldn't list it. But under text path options, if I do choose the mask, look what happens. Suddenly, my text is glued to that path, even the curvy line. So I go in and change this. Notice that my text is now being adjusted. And I have things under here called margins. If I move the margin, it actually pushes the text. I get a different type of red line now. This new red line, which is the margin guide, which pushes the text along my path, which is my mask. Now I'm going to delete my mask. Boop. And of course, the text returns to normal. Now, the question that almost everybody asks after I've done that is, well, okay, that's an open path. What about a closed path, such as a circle? Okay, so the beginning and end point of that mask is the same. If I go path option, yep, it now puts that on there. Now, I can also play with this in the sense of there's a thing called reverse path, which actually puts it on the outer end as opposed to the inside. Okay. I can also put things parallel. Force alignment, which is never looks good no matter how many times I've done this. And with the margins, I can keyframe that and I can make the text go around the end. So for example, I can just start 0, 0, 0, my first margin, all the way around a few times. And around she goes. That's the niftiness of using masks and text together. Because remember, we were just using paths to make our text appear and disappear, like so. But by telling to make the mask a path option, I can now move this around. Oops, I think I just, there we go. Actually, accidentally inversed it. Now, again, this is the point upon the class I would sit here and go, okay, everybody, start practicing with this. Make your mask, be it any shape, way, or form you can think of, and then put your text onto it. One of the funnier things on these open paths, if you keep moving the margin, it will literally push it off and still the same direction. Whee, totally off screen because there's nothing holding it back. So if you're really good with your pen tool, yes, you could like do an outline of somebody's profile or something like that and have the text show up exactly where you want it to. Any thoughts, comments, previews? Anything that makes you go, what the heck just happened? Come on, somebody out there has to have a question at this point in time. Or have I driven you guys asleep already? Yeah, this is the beauty of text. And by the way, as crazy as this sounds, let me go ahead and put a circle back up here again. Obviously, if you hold down a shift key, you get a true circle. Move this stuff around. Pop this to the other side. And I hope you guys do practice through the week. Comment that just came up was really cool and wanted to try it myself. This is, like I said, this is the disadvantage of not having us all in the same classroom. But what I was about to say was this is really cool, like I said, because you can, and I'm going to go ahead and create a quickie animation here. 6 seconds. Let's go around 3 or 4 times. Is this. Okay, so I got my animation going around and around and around. Yeah, I can add animators to that. So for example, I can change the size of this. So I have to have the bracket. The range selector down to about 2 letters. Now I'm going to change the scale. And now I'm going to animate that offset to the same length of time. So I'm going to put it into a negative number so it actually starts off screen. That negative number, go to the end, put it into a positive number. There we go. So now when it's spinning around, the animator should kick in any second now. There it is. A little behind time. I'll have to play with the timing on that. Well, basically, the stopwatch is how you're doing the question was, how do you move the text along the mask? And just use the stopwatch, and the answer is the stopwatch is what's telling it when to happen. Okay. Yeah, I just basically, no, I only changed the scale. I did not change anything other than that. But I didn't do a very good job timing it. And also the scale may not be the right one to visualize this. So hold on for a second. I'm going to delete that animator. Let's try adding instead. Oh, let's do a position instead, because the position will allow me to, and I'm going to shrink this down so it's only getting like 1 letter. Start off screen. Say, okay, I want to animate that. And what I'm going to do is the offset. 3 seconds in, it'll go all the way across. Go in, it'll have it go back the other way. And I'm going to have the things pop off. Now go in. There we go. There we go. So basically, the animator is moving the position of the lettering down 587 pixels toward the center of the circle. And of course, my timing sucks on that. Why didn't it do that? Sometimes what you want to do is you want to do the, I'm going to turn the mask off. I'm going to set my animator first. This is where it gets into timing. Oh, I'll answer your question in just a second of how the rotation works when I come back to that. So basically, so I'm going to basically go over 3 seconds. And drop down. Go over 6 seconds and have it come back the other direction. Okay. So I'm making sure that this, you can see the trial and error I go through. There we go. You and I have to sit there and think about these things. So there's my animator. Around it goes down and then back the other way. That looks good. Now I'm going to add that to the path. I'm going to make it sure that the text is on the outside. And how do I make it run around? Well, basically the margin when you're doing with mask is what's pushing it around. So I decide where I want to start. I'm going to start it there. Go over 6 seconds and say, have that spin around, 1, 2, 3, and then stop right there where it started. And you can see how that combined that. That's not my fanciest thing I've ever done, but it was for demonstration purposes. But also you could see my troubleshooting of, yeah, sometimes it's easier to do the animator first before you start doing mask-like stuff. And also you can get, even this demo is one of those things, this is way too busy and, to be effective. It's kind of silly in some respects too. Okay. But, let's have the fun of practicing with this stuff. Okay. Stop that. There we go. Stop it. There we go. Now, one of the questions that's normally asked about here is, couldn't I just put this onto the mask and then just rotate the entire layer to give me the same look and feel? Not the animator part, but the answer is yeah, probably. If you recall hearing me say many times, there's more than one way to do everything in After Effects. It doesn't mean that there's a right or one's better than the other. There's so many different overlaps. But the thing to keep in mind about this also is, because I still have my layer options, after I've done all that, I can still come here to transform. And I can grab this entire text layer. Oops, not there, I'm not. And I can just make this move, say from left to right. Talk about making a busy title sequence. Not that anybody could read that. But again, it gives you an idea of the craziness that you can do with these sort of things. It goes back to what we were talking about when I was showing your project. It's like the audience has to be able to read the text. Now, again, if my circle was too big, I could also sit there and say, hey, scale the entire layer, bring the entire layer down. There we go. So the layer options are always available to you. And yes, you could put filters on top of this as well to have it do other kind of crazy things. There's just so many possibilities that it will drive you nuts. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, questions? What do you think? Like I said, it's kind of, the thing about After Effects is it's not that any one of these things is hard, it's just the volume of information. Okay, it can drive you nuts. But if you focus on one little thing at a time, don't try to do everything simultaneously. As you just witnessed with me, I added in first, the mask. Then I said, no, the animator, I've got to see clear, do the animator. Went back and put the text on the circle, and then I went in and changed the layering. So you can see the logic of how I just did one little thing at a time until I got to the point where I was done. Okay? So those are all things you need to think about. All right. Like I said, it's coming up on 10 of 9. Questions, thoughts, ideas about text. Again, I'd like to point out that there is my handout for you, okay, which covers how to make the presets, the pre-made animations, then also how to make the self-made animations, And then I have several options, which is just for, things in class. Like I said, don't do the 3D ones until I get to that next week. We'll come back and revisit that. Okay. I'm thinking it's time for another quick break. Does that sound good to everybody? And then when we come back, we will talk about project number 2. Everybody good with me? Have I put you to sleep? Okay, it's 10 up. Let's get back in here at 9:05. Okay, I'm going to stop the video at this point. No reason to make a bigger video. So stop recording. Yes.